Hello. So this week I'm going to be chatting about testing. And one of the things I've seen a lot of my time, and I think is absolutely fundamental to being a good marketer, whether you be a brand marketer or a performance marketer, is the ability to run tests properly. And I've seen a lot of half-assed tests or tests run improperly that not only mean that you don't get learnings, they often mean that you get wrong or dangerous learnings. So not even worse than making no progress at all is making backwards progress. And this is absolutely vital, as said, to both brand and performance. If in both of those avenues, if you should always look to have a meaningful test live in the market at any one time. And testing is really the only way that we can get to progress. The ability to run solid tests that goes X is better than Y is the only thing that leads us to be able to go, okay, so let's move more towards X. But it's really only a thing that works if you do it properly, if you do it correctly. And I've seen so many instances of people doing it improperly and dangerously. So I'll start with running through some of the biggest things that I've seen go wrong for people and the biggest things that I've seen basically damage test and make the results unmeaningful. So firstly, it's consistency and lack of consistency. And what I mean by this is where between the test and control cells, you basically have subtle differences between the two that means that all other things aren't equal. The point of a test is to run it where you make one change, or it might be multivariate, it might be multiple changes. But other than that, all other things should remain equal. But because of something that's been set up there, that might fall down at some point, whether it's the tests running across different time frames or the tests running across completely different seasonality periods, for example. All of that leads to inconsistent results when actually a lot of things are unequal throughout the two tests. So that's the first one. The second one is not measuring confidence. So what I mean here is basically statistics and applying basic statistics to your test. So I've seen a lot of cases where people kind of point to tests and go, X did 2% better than Y, for example, and that could be fine. But 2% in a lot of cases, depending on how much data you have, could just be natural variation. It could just be natural chance that, two things are not going to be exactly equal, and it could go one way, it could go the other. What we have to do in testing is to measure statistical significance and what statistical significance is basically saying it goes, this is your natural variation or deviation that happens over time, the standard deviation. Does over the test period, do I see an effect that is greater than these normal swings in performance? If I do see something that's greater than that, then there's a good chance that the thing you changed is accountable. If it doesn't escape that standard deviation, essentially it says, I mean, it could go either way. Either one had an equal chance of winning it, and there's no way to possibly tell whether your test was effective or not. Thirdly, not giving a test long enough to actually perform. And this is really a case. I mean, it can happen at the campaign level, where, for example, you set live a new campaign and you expect it to perform straight from the off on a platform like Meta, for example, equally as well to campaigns as you've been running for months and months and months. That's obviously not going to happen in a campaign. It has to go through that learning period. It has to learn everything to even begin to catch up with the existing campaign. So the first week is essentially a testing period. It's a learning period. You have to discount and exclude that data from anything ongoing. But the same is true of new channels. If you launch a new channel, sorry, and you judge it on the first week or the first month versus channels that you've been running for years and improving for years, then obviously it's not going to stack up in terms of performance because you've had, I don't know, 5% of the time to actually improve that. What you're really looking for is, okay, is this in a place where I could improve it in the long term? Is it stacking up well enough that I can confidently grow this campaign or this channel to the same level as others? Number four, and I see this the whole time, is unmeaningful tests or tests that are kind of pointless, that make a change, but actually the change isn't meaningful enough to have an effect. And this goes back to that confidence thing where standard deviation is a thing. We do expect to see natural two different things performing differently for any number of reasons. That's just noise. What we have to do is set live a test that is meaningful enough, that is likely to have a big enough impact, that escapes that noise. And that means that it's unlikely to be simple things like, changing the color of the button. That's the classic CRO example. But you have to run tests that are actually going to tell you something meaningful long term. And that also applies to, it might be meaningful for one channel, for example, changing X amount of ad copy, but actually, is there a test that we can apply that is meaningful uh, or that escapes this very narrow scenario that we're testing within and tells us something deeper about our audience or about all of the campaigns that we're running that we can use in all of our campaigns going forward? So number 5, changing the goalposts, and this is a classic one as well. It's we don't see we kind of set live a test, for example, we don't see statistical change in the area that we wanted to. So then suddenly we start measuring it on the basis of click-through rate or something like that, and that might not be a meaningful kind of goal. We have to scope test at the start to be able to go, can we have or can we find differences in the metrics that mean the most to us. And if we kind of use another metric as a proxy, it's fine, but only as long as that metric actually is a good proxy. If we're looking to measure CPA, for example, then an improvement in click-through rate might not necessarily be a good thing for us. It could just mean, for example, that it's more viral, that it's more clickbaity, anything like that. But if it doesn't convert, then we don't necessarily know whether it's better or not. So changing the goalposts can be okay in certain scenarios. I would hesitate against it, but if you're changing the goalposts to something that is actually a meaningful proxy, maybe you got less data than you thought you were going to get, but make sure that if you are using a proxy, that it's actually meaningful and actually stands up against the original metric that you wanted to test in the first place. So these are all those 5 things. And as I said, these are the kind of traps that people falling into over time. And I think what this leads to is not only, if you fall into any of these traps, basically, what it leads to not only is tests that don't really tell you anything, but the test could actually actively tell you the wrong thing. They could discount or disprove a channel or lead you to write off a channel as being ineffective, for example, on the basis of a very short test that fell down against, for example, not giving it enough time. That leads you to never try that channel again in the future, or to change your strategy and go, okay, we can't even test channels like that. We have to go completely the other way. So testing half-assed is basically not just a bad thing in that it doesn't lead to progress, it can actually lead to active removal of progress and you moving backwards. So testing is really key, and do not fall into any of these traps.